where the story's kinda cool and the island's kinda scary. What exactly are the rules? Man, Jack is pretty hairy. Here we go into the damn haunted jungle. Unlike this rhyme, try not to fumble. Not saying they were always ghosts, just saying we're losing lost.
Welcome to the podcast, brother.
Welcome to the podcast, brother.
My name is Derek Hobson. I am the younger brother.
I am Pierce Nahigyan. I am the older brother. And this is
Losing
Lost. This is the podcast where we discussed the ABC drama Lost, which aired from 2004 to 2010, a show we've both loved and hated and still retain quite a bit of fondness for. This episode, we are going to be discussing the pilot, episodes 1 and 2. It is a two-part pilot. Was, at the time, the most expensive pilot in TV history at, I want to make sure I'm getting this right, $14 million. Quite a lot of money. Still one of the most expensive pilots that was ever made. It has since been surpassed. I think the current record holder is the show Vinyl, which made a $30 million pilot, which...
What is Vinyl?
Exactly. I believe it was an HBO show that did not get picked up for a second season. So before we got into the episode proper, I wanted to share some interesting info that I gleaned from this really great article from Empire Magazine. They basically got a lot of people who worked on the show together. They got the actors together, and they did basically just this big interview where they talked about their experiences making it. So it starts off with Lloyd Braun, the former chairman of ABC Entertainment. He says he wants to make Castaway the series. And what they say is, you know, people working with him were like, so you just want a show about somebody talking to a volleyball, like, for every episode? And he's just like, no, I want to make it like on an island. So they contract Jeff Lieber, who wrote the original draft. And his idea was, at the center there were two brothers, like Cain and Abel. And I'm quoting him now. It says, after the plane crash, the rich one takes hold inland in a fortress. The less affluent one takes hold on the beach. The rule structure I was told was this has to be hyper real. I was hooked up with National Geographic to figure out whether it was an islet or an archipelago. At one point, I pitched a shark attack, but I was told, no, that's not realistic. And Jeff Lieber is still credited as a story by. He gets a story by on every single episode. He had no involvement with the show after that initial pilot script, but because J.J. Abrams and Damon Lindelof did use sort of skeleton of his idea, he still gets credit for that. One of the important things was Lieber changed the title to Nowhere. It started off as Lost, which was Lloyd Braun's idea. Lloyd Braun really liked the idea of a show named Lost. So Lieber changed the title to Nowhere, sent Braun the script, and Braun hated it. He was like, this is not what I want. I don't like this at all. So he wanted someone else to do a rewrite. He contacts J.J. Abrams, who at this point was getting a lot of heat from his show Alias. But J.J. was really busy. So he gets in touch with Damon Lindelof as a possible writing partner. And Lindelof says, this is him, I'm quoting him now, what J.J. brought was the mystery. He pitched The Hatch and the others, among many other things, in our first meeting. He felt that the island they crash onto should be really insane. And then another quote from Lieber, I always joke that I was doing Lord of the Flies and they were doing Lord of the Rings. One was magical and science fiction-y. The other was about the gritty ugliness of people. I guess if you pitch the gritty ugliness of people, the studio might not go for it. So JJ and Lindelof, they write an outline. Braun likes it and they get the green light. And then according to J.J. Abrams, they had 11 weeks to write the script, cast it, shoot it, cut it, and turn it in. Which is that's crazy. He says it was insanity. Lindelof said that in terms of the differences between Lieber's script and their script, there were some similarities in terms of archetypes. He had a fugitive on his flight, an Australian prisoner in chains who became Kate. There was a nurse who became Jack, but really they were starting from scratch. Another thing that changed, so in their original pilot script, Hurley was a 50-year-old redneck, and Sawyer ends up dropping him off a cliff because he's too heavy to hold. But once Jorge Garcia was involved, they liked him too much and they changed the character up. John Hamm came in to read for Jack, pre-Mad Men. Matthew Fox ended up being cast 10 days before shooting started. Evangeline Lilly was because they couldn't find him. So originally the idea was before Jack was a doctor, he was the pilot, and they were going to cast Michael Keaton, and this was when they were going to kill him off at the end of the pilot, and then they realized that audiences probably wouldn't respond to that, even though it would be like anybody can die, sort of like on Game of Thrones. They were like, no, we should have a central character that you're following that you can really like get involved with. So they decided, no, we're not going to go with that way. They changed him into a doctor. Evangeline Lilly was about to quit acting when she got cast. She had just gotten her real estate license in the mail. She was like, I'm done with this. So Lindelof said, my journal entries were filled with panic. Everyone is saying, how are you going to sustain this intensity? What's the 15th episode going to be? And I was thinking, I don't even know what the 4th episode is going to be. I didn't pitch this to you guys. I wouldn't have been at all surprised if this thing had been a catastrophic failure. ABC told J.J. Abrams to shoot an ending in case the pilot didn't get picked up, and then they were going to just spin it into a movie, basically. I'm assuming that's because of the exorbitant cost that they wanted to recoup something, but it doesn't say in the article.
So did they do that, or is that something that JJ's like, I'll say I will? And,
that's a good question. I didn't say in the article, at least I didn't see it. I'm sure he's talked about it elsewhere. I have just two more interesting things about this. One is J.J. Abrams, since Lloyd Braun had really like wanted the show, like he had, it was his idea for the title, it was his idea for the island. He wanted Braun to have like a personal something in the show. And so he is the voice that says previously on Lost. And nobody knew that except for him and JJ and Lindelof. He basically like JJ called him up and said like, this is your baby. And, I want, since it got picked up for the series, I want you to be that voice that we hear every episode. And then the last interesting thing that actually explains something in the episode is, that ticka 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 noise that the smoke monster makes?
Yes.
That was recorded in a New York taxi cab. You may recall when Rose says the noise sounds familiar and they ask her, where are you from? She says the Bronx. The reason that the smoke monster sounds familiar is because it sounds like a New York taxi cab.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's the Empire article. It's a great article. Josh Holloway, who plays Sawyer, talks about the cast getting drunk like a lot together, and just that the pilot was like this crazy ride. So yeah, I just thought that was an interesting sort of background to talk about Lost and sort of all the steps that it took to get to where it was. I had no idea that it was that quick of a turnaround. I had always assumed that this was something that had been in the making of process for like months and months at a time. And it really was like this thing that just came together really quickly, which is fascinating to me because it's such an ambitious show and it's such an ambitious investment by ABC that, as far as I'm aware, hadn't really taken a risk on a show like this before.
Well, and that's why I thought this is a very dubious memory of mine. I vaguely recall that the guy who greenlit this and Grey's Anatomy and Desperate Housewives knew he was going to get fired or something. So he threw caution to the wind and just greenlit a bunch of stuff that they'd have to spend money on and was fired before any of this came out. I don't know if that's true, but it was something that I remember reading on, because I remember all of those wound up obviously being pretty big hits.
Yeah.
But I thought it was a vindictive thing, not a we believe in this product.
I mean, there could have been another producer. I can look that up later on and see. But from at least from this article, Lloyd Braun, the chairman of ABC at the time, no longer is, really seemed to speak of this with a fondness. But again, that could be, looking in the rearview mirror, being like, oh yeah, no, I always loved the show. I really wanted it to succeed. So.
Well, I do think that's super interesting that the original pitch was more like religious Cain and Abel thing.
Yeah. And more like Lord of the Flies, more like there's no smoke monster, there's no kooky people out on the island. It's just people like surviving on an island, which, I could see that happening. But of course, what draws you in for the show is all of the mysteries that leave you scratching your head. Let me start off with this. The show starts off with no opening theme, with no song at all. Just the word lost that slowly drifts towards the camera. I'm going to ask you this question. I want you to answer me honestly. Does it bother you that we don't go through the O?
Honestly, you know what the real issue I have with that is? It was early enough in the aughts that the pixels on the O are the thing that I am like, nah, smooth it out, because it gets pixelated at the end there. That part bothers me quite a bit. And I think that the first time I saw it, I think I was bummed that we didn't go through the O. But on a rewatch, I was just sitting there with a big old dumb grin on my face, because I'm like, oh, it's like sitting
Here we
down
go
with a
again.
nice- yeah, it's. I was very excited. I had a big fat smile on my face. The pixels. I was waiting for them. I was prepared for them. I didn't think about going through the O. Is this something that bothers you?
Every time I see an episode, I'm like, maybe this time we'll go through the O. And no, we just kind of go to the side of it, between the O and the S. And it bothers me. It really bothers me. I don't know what
I guess it's emblematic of the whole show. It's like, are we gonna get you there? Whoop.
Yeah. I'm always
but,
like when you're like bowling and you want to like make a strike and you're just like squiggling around. That's what I do in my seat every time.
I actually, you are bringing up to me. I feel like this is a good place to end this. Just ask, on a scale of, I don't know what scale, but how did you like this pilot?
I did. It's interesting in that I think because I've seen it so many times before, I was more like looking at all these characters. I was less watching it as like a show and more just sort of like, oh, there's Maggie Grace. Oh, there's Ian Somerhalder. I haven't seen them in a long time. I was more sort of like looking at everything in the background and trying to see like, you know, how is this like how did this all come together? Like, what did they think is going on as actors? I also noticed something I hadn't noticed before, which is like a dude who's still buckled into his seatbelt in the fuselage, and he's upside down behind Jack.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, and he's like swinging.
Yes, yeah.
When he sees the wreckage. Yeah,
so I was doing a lot of just looking at the.
No, it's interesting because it's like we know more about these characters than clearly the actors do.
Yes.
This was like some of the line readings is just like, I'm like, you think you're someone else at this moment.
Yep.
And I, again, major props to them. Just, it feels like everyone, I mean, maybe that's even part of it, is like everyone going in blind over this 12 weeks. Was it, you said it was 12 weeks or 11 weeks?
It was 11 weeks.
Yeah, like major props to people who just roll with it. But it is very fun. Like, to me, even as going as the baseline level of Kate, I get the impression that even though I'm sure it was all filmed at the same time, pilot part 1 seems like she's playing a different character than pilot part 2.
You know, it's funny that you say that. What I noted down was that part 1 is very much Jack. It's Jack. Like, we follow Jack from like start to finish. He's our main character. And then part 2 is very much the ensemble. It's like Jack stays on the beach to like watch over his patient. And then that's when we really get to see, you know, the rest of the people. And yeah, it's funny how Matthew Fox is playing him like an intense but good guy. And, you know, he hasn't gotten to the twitchy, you know, push to the edge stage that he when we find out that Jack is just a psycho kind of.
Okay, wait. Before we go, because maybe that's even a better way to go through this, is rather than beat by beat through the story, going character by character. Because
that's a good idea.
I would love to talk about Jack.
Yeah, go for it.
I love Jack in this episode. This episode makes it so clear, especially even on a rewatch. In fact, I'm realizing now this is how I should categorize my notes. Is I should categorize them by character. That'll make this easier next time. But I mentioned this because when you were talking about how Jack, you know, like he's intense but not twitchy. Like, one of my favorite exchanges is when, you know, he sees that Boone is doing CPR and he's doing CPR wrong. And Jack, of course, is like, you need to seriously consider giving your license back. And it's clear that he says this line expecting Boone to just get quiet and shut down.
Uh-huh.
But then Boone is like, "Oh, hey, maybe we can stick her neck thing." And it's like you see that Jack as a character just like pivots and is like, "Okay, he didn't shut up." And so it's like, "Oh, okay, you go get a pen." And
Yeah.
just like the next way to like get rid of him.
I wrote down. I didn't remember Jack being so annoyed with both Boone and Charlie. Like he's so dismissive of both of them. All he's trying to do is just get his missions accomplished, and he just sees the two of them as just obstacles in his way.
Well, let's not neglect Kate, because I actually think that his first interaction with Kate is in the same caliber of dismissiveness. Because I wrote this down because I think it's hilarious. And again, like I think the acting in this scene is great. I love Jack and Kate's meet cute. I think it's glorious. But I love that, everyone's in shock, obviously. And so, like, Kate very much, like, Evangeline Lilly, she's really playing it as though she's like, I was just, oh, God, what's happening? Like, she seems distraught. Yeah. But what I love is that we've seen that, like, he's bleeding. He's got a wound. He can't reach it. He clearly, like, ran away from the beach to get some privacy because he hates people. Or at least doesn't want to be on call, I guess, is how I'll rephrase it. He sees this woman and he's like, excuse me, have you ever... sewn? And he is looking for a yes or no answer.
Yep.
And she, of course, takes this because she's probably in shock and taking this very seriously. It's like, and like gives him this long belabored, and then he's just like, okay, great. Can you come stitch me up?
And then she says, like, no, I used a sewing machine. She's like, just come over here and help me.
I love that, Jack. That dismissiveness, but yeah, with Charlie, with Boone, with Kate initially, I thought that was hilarious. I like that as a character.
He's more just, he makes decisions. Like he's that's what he's doing, like through this whole pilot. And as the show goes on, he becomes less, I don't know if he's becomes less sure of himself or more open to like, letting other people give him notes. I don't know, but it is very much like he acts like a surgeon who is used to being obeyed. And
yes.
it is interesting to see that in this character and to see how dismissive he is of other people.
I'm realizing this is a big part of why I like Jack as a character is because he reminds me a lot of Squall from Final Fantasy VIII, where people have their problems with him. My favorite thing about Squall is that he's forced into a leadership role, doesn't want to be a leader. In fact, all he really wants is to date this girl who may not really like him. And so like everything that he does is like a means to that end of like, how can I save her? How can I make her life better? And I know like this is getting ahead of ourselves, but I like this whole like I like when Jack, he's like, well, to rewind for a minute, just in terms of like Jack's characterization, I remember the very first time watching this thinking like, oh, he must be a doctor because he's doing all the doctor things. And then, of course, eventually just says he's a doctor. And I'm like, oh, what an interesting way to show that he's a doctor. I remember then like being a little bit more jaded, rewatching that pilot episode and being like, this is such a cheap way of showing like, oh, my main character is a hero and a doctor because he can save everybody. Now, 10 years later, I'm back in it where Jack saving everyone in the opening, I think is brilliant. And partly because realizing now in my life, having met people who are doctors, how many people, and certainly with the pandemic, how many of these doctors are like, it's such an easier job if you catch something early than if someone has a problem that doesn't go diagnosed. And I'm realizing that like, even though, because I think on that second rewatch when I was getting jaded about it, where I'm like, oh, for someone who doesn't like being around people, he's certainly saving a ton of people. I guess that's for the audience. Like, again, very jaded me. But this one is like, no. This makes a ton of sense. This is a guy who wants to fix all the things that he can fix right now because he knows that if he doesn't, he's going to be on a beach with a bunch of people screaming, writhing in pain, and his job is just going to be 10 times worse.
See, I never even thought about that. I think that's true. But I also think that Jack he's doing the one thing he knows how to do, which is save people, or as we will get into many, many episodes hence, fix people. What you see when he gets on the beach is you have that shot of like, Shannon screaming and like people bleeding and stumbling around and like everybody's reacting to this horrible thing that's happening. And Jack, the way he reacts to trauma is, I'm going to get busy. I'm going to save the people that I can. That's how I'm going to deal with this horrible situation, is that I'm going to get to work. And that's what I'm going to do. And I think, Damon Lindelof obviously is a comic book guy. I assume J.J. Abrams is as well. And I can't help but see the parallels between Jack Shephard and Superman. The famous saying about Superman is, the only weakness that Superman has is that he can't save everyone. That is the tragedy of that character, is that he has these godlike powers. And what makes him interesting is not that he has these godlike powers, because that makes him, he's basically invincible. I mean, you can come up with kryptonite, and you can come up with like magic and the red sun and all of these things, but like he can do pretty much anything you want. But the thing is, he cares, and he's devastated by every single life that he can't save. And that is Jack. And with Jack, it's not an altruistic thing. He doesn't do this from a place of compassion, at least not that I remember really from the show. It's more that like, this is what he can do. This is what Jack is good at. He is good at fixing people. He is good at helping people. And so that's what he's going to do. And for me, I think maybe it's that he doesn't want people to bother him. But I also think that him going off alone to go like get sewn up is basically him being like, all of these people saw me like saving them. I don't want them to think that I'm weak. I don't want them to think that I'm hurt. I need to do this alone, because I'm all these people have right now.
That's a good point. I like my interpretation better because I like, but I also know it's a little bit clouded by knowing that the twitchy Jack of later.
Yeah.
But yeah, because I do, you know what? And actually, I think your point makes more sense, because I'm realizing when Jack comes back and he lies about, they're like, were there any survivors? Which I guess at the same time, I'm kind of like, it's not really a lie to say there were no survivors, because technically
I think it can be both things. But also, I do want to, not to jump too far ahead, but here's a question that I have, and I don't know if it's a plot hole, because I was going to ask you this, because I know that you catch these things.
I know what you're going to ask. I know exactly what you're going to ask, because I wrote this down.
Okay, so he comes back, says there's no survivors, lying to them, so that they don't panic. And then later in the episode, Boone says, is the polar bear the thing that killed the pilot?
Killed the pilot. Yes.
I was like, who told you that it killed the pilot?
I think that is absolutely a plot hole. I thought for sure I missed something. But yes, I wrote this down because I'm like, I started writing down, when do the lies start?
Immediately.
Yeah. Well, I felt like part 2, I know Charlie's kind of a liar just to begin with, but I felt like part 2 is when like the lies start to come out, because obviously, Kate and, and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it was like, Boone doesn't know this.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think that's 100% a plot hole or an error.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like, I imagine it's maybe it's because of the shooting schedule was so fast that they like shot something where like maybe there's a scene where like Charlie like tells him the thing, or maybe they shot an alternate scene where Jack said, yeah, something took him or whatever. But yeah, I don't think I'd ever noticed that until this watch, because I was taking notes. And yeah, it's such a quick thing that I'm sure most people watching the pilot like didn't even notice. But I was just sort of like, whoa, how'd you know that?
Yeah, no, I likewise. I like it. I picked it up and I was like, this is so weird. Yeah, super weird. This one's an observation, but I have to share it because I don't know who made the grass plane, but I'm like, surely it wasn't Jack.
I also wrote this down. I was like, he took the time to cut in this grass plane that he immediately just chucks into the sand. I was like, no, I don't believe it.
Okay, we're on the same page. Yeah, I'm like, because for some reason in my head, I thought Hurley made it. I'm like, oh, I could see that. But like, no, they're showing Jack, and yeah, that too, I did write down that when he mentions that, oh, I took some flying lessons, but decided I was from, like, I want to see that flashback. Even though I know,
I'm surprised we never did that. But yeah, it's so funny because like it's a great image of like this plane, but it immediately falls apart when you think about it, because it's like so the idea here is that like he needed something to like visually show them like hitting turbulence, but it's like he could have had a stick, but it's not as good of an image. But it's also like I can't imagine Jack taking the time, because it was like a really well made plane. Like, I can't imagine him taking the time to actually cut this thing into the shape and just be like, oh yeah, look at this plane that I made. Like, nope, no, I don't believe that.
Oh, this is another one that's just like just more of like a episode specific. But when Jack, you're first in the jungle, first like 2 minutes of the show.
Yeah.
And he pulls out the bottle. I get that this partly foreshadows, hey, I'm gonna use this later to like put it on my wound. But there's also part of me, and again, I know he's in a plane crash, but I was like, since he had like I think 3 of those bottles on him, there's a certain part of me that's like, wouldn't it have made more sense if like he pulls out the other pocket and it's like and the other one is shattered, and it's like
those bottles are usually plastic, I think. Although they do make a clinky clink sound when he takes them out. But yes, it would make more sense if they were shattered. But again, they all end up on the island through supernatural means. Like they all should have died. But as we'll find out later, they've been whisked here by powers unseen.
That's a good point. Well, I have one specifically on that powers that be, but let me see if there's any of these other ones. Oh, okay. One of these is actually no. I'm gonna stick with the alcohol thing for a sec because I do really like this. This is not a question or anything. This is just a observation that I really enjoyed. Was when Jack passes Kate the alcohol and he's like, "It's for your hands," and she starts pouring it, and he's like, "Save me some." And then like she gives him a look, and he like has to back off, like he's not an alcoholic. He's like no, for the wound to clean it.
Do you think they had it in mind that he was an alcoholic? Because seems yeah.
That feels right. That feels real right. In fact, I'm kind of shocked now that they don't. I mean, I know eventually he gets into pills and whatnot, but like, yeah, it feels like have a doctor that's an alcoholic. Like, why wouldn't you do that?
Why wouldn't you? You know what I also wrote for that scene? So first of all, I want to say I also love that scene between him and Kate. I think it's a great come down from that incredibly exhilarating opening. But like his monologue to her about cutting the dural sac and the nerve spilling out like angel hair pasta. And I wish that this moment wasn't undercut by what we find out many seasons later, that it wasn't him who, told himself to count to 5. It was his father in the room who basically like talked him through it. And on the one hand, from a character perspective, it's like, okay, so what we thought of as this being like a really cool story that Jack was telling in the pilot actually turns into him sort of lying and sort of, changing history. And I kind of hate that they did that.
Yes, this was one of the things I had this written down as a question because I don't. This is like one of those. I feel like this must be like a season 3 thing, or maybe not.
I think it's later. I think it's even later.
Okay, because I don't remember this episode all that well, so I'm like, did this actually happen? But yeah, isn't it like it's his surgery and his dad? Doesn't his dad even like wind up finishing it for him or something like that?
I don't remember if he does it for him. I do remember. In fact, no. I think this is a season 6 episode because it's doing the flashbacks that show how Jacob contacts each of them. And I know he's in the surgery. His father is there, like I think assisting or overseeing, and Jack's like freaking out, and he basically like Christian like talks him through it. And then later on, Jack is mad at him because he's like, you gave me like a timeout in front of like all of my nurses or whatever. And Christian's just like, I'm just, trying to help you. By this point, we've gotten into twitchy Jack, who like can't take any advice from anybody and can't accept things that he can't do himself. It feels like a retcon that it diminishes this story, like hearing it in the pilot, because it's cool. It's a cool story, and it makes you be like, okay, this is somebody I want to follow. And now it just makes me feel like, oh, he's a jerk because he didn't say like, my dad was there and he told me to count to 5 and that I wouldn't be scared anymore. And I hate my father and he's a dick, but I did it. And then I sewed her up and it was fine. So,
but I like, I do remember, cause I really love that scene. I thought that was awesome. Yeah. There was a small part of me that like, I know he's also doing this as a way to like distract himself. Which again, I actually like really enjoy. Everyone's acting in this pilot is great.
Kate says she would have run, which is Yep.
Yes. And he's like, you're not running now. And then later he tells her to run. I'd really like his expressions as she's sewing him, and he's like very clearly like, this is not going well. So like, part of me was like, he's telling this story almost as a distraction for himself.
Yeah.
But there was a small part of me too that was like, could you still watch this knowing that he's like thinking about his dad in this moment? Which actually kind of ties into another thing that I was thinking about. And this gets into one of those retro things, because I'm sure the answer to this question is that the shot looked cool. But when the disaster has plateaued, or all the urgent care is taken care of,
Yeah.
and Jack, he leans up against the opening of the fuselage, and the camera's like,
I love that shot. I love it.
I do too. But what do you think he's doing there? Is he like looking for his dad's coffin? Is he
I hadn't thought about that. I thought that he was looking in and seeing all the dead bodies in there. Is that he's kind of taking it in, like how many people have died. And it's a very, I remember that shot being a lot longer, because it's almost immediately undercut by Boone coming back with the pen, which is a funny beat, but it's also like, in my memory, that shot's a lot longer, and he's just sort of just looking into the fuselage and just seeing like, the horrible tragedy that's just happened. But they really only give us like a couple like breaths, and then Boone comes running back. I definitely think probably in like retroactively, maybe he is looking for his father's coffin. But I'm sure that like, at the time, when they were just shooting the pilot, he had no idea that, it was anything to do with his father. Completely unrelated. You know what I also like about the scene with him and Kate? I like the fact that Jack has body hair. It's as a hairy man, as a very hairy man. I think I've watched almost every single MCU movie, and it's not just Marvel movies. It's basically every action movie of the last 25 years, where every time like the action hero takes his shirt off, he's completely bare, no hair whatsoever. He's just, he's got sculpted abs, and he's got all these muscles, and he's clean shaven. He's like totally shaven, like somebody like just waxed him like just the moment before. And Jack's got like a decent amount of chest hair and like stomach hair, and I'm just sort of like, yeah, that's what a man looks like.
No, I'm right there with you. I think that's a great. It is like it's refreshing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the thing too. Is like, this is 2004. I'm guessing filmed in maybe 2003. It's just this whole. I felt like everything in here really held up. I'm trying to think if there was anything that actually. Oh, actually, no. I've got one thing with Locke, but we'll get to Locke.
The fact that Sawyer immediately gets after Saeed for like him, like, being the reason the plane went down, really made me remember. I was like, man, this came out 3 years after 9/11.
Yeah,
that's wild to think about now. That that they would make a show about like a plane crash like so soon afterwards. I can't really put myself back into the mindset to think like how I would have processed that. But like the fact that I remember at the time, though, the fact that Sawyer, the Southern character, is immediately pointing fingers at Saeed is very appropriate to the time, and probably still would be to now, unfortunately. I know I don't think we're on Sawyer yet, but I also wanted to give a shout out to Sawyer's horrendous haircut in the pilot. I don't know if you noticed it. It is not the hair that he has in the next episode. It's real bad. It's one step away from a mullet. I don't know who gave him that haircut, but they were not doing him any favors.
I will say, the only thing I really noticed was just his facial stubble was just so like it's almost like he was freshly waxed before a couple of his scenes. Like they waxed his face. I don't know. There was some weirdness with his facial hair too.
Yeah, his look isn't what it will be. Like I think in the very next episode, I think the hair has a lot to do with it. I think that the fact that he doesn't have any stubble. It's funny like seeing that and then seeing, it's like I have not yet achieved my final form, my final hunky Sawyer form.
He might actually be a good one to segue to. I have one last thing I want to say about Jack. I know why they did this. I know that the logical reason for this is you're introducing your main character and your whole ensemble. But knowing what we know, there was a small part of me that's like Jack as a Jacob, and how we have that whole episode where Jacob does go around and he touches every one of the main characters. And I was like, does Jack touch it? And so like I immediately started like pacing. I'm like, does he touch it? And sure enough, like, yeah, like he touches Locke to like get the guy's mangled leg out. He touches Claire to tell her she's going to be okay when she's having contractions. Then of course touches Hurley to help with Claire. He touches Boone, but also to get away from Rose. He touches Rose. The reverse is that Charlie, of course, touches Jack on the plane. Then Jack touches Sawyer when he pulls him off Saeed, and then also touches Saeed to like back him away. Yeah, the only ones that he doesn't touch is Michael. He just has a chat with him about the dog, and he doesn't interact at all with Jin and Sun. I don't know. I thought it was one of those things where I'm like, that's kind of neat.
Yeah, that's interesting. Claire is 8 months pregnant. Do they talk about in her they must talk about it in her episode that like there's no way in hell that she would be allowed to on a plane.
This ties back to what you're saying about Jack with body hair. But when Claire takes off her shirt, for some reason I'm like, there should be a little bit of armpit hair. I don't know. I just like, I'm sure, I don't even know how to pronounce her name, Amelie DeRaven or Raven. I don't know. I'm sure that she's I'm sure that she's very nice and whatnot. I just like, there's a part of me that's like, you're 8 months pregnant. You're not like engaged. You're not dating. I don't know. There's just a small part of me. It's like, she should have some stubble. Like, I don't know. That was the one, anyway, but yeah, I'm sure they'll explain in a flashback what the hell's going on with an 8 months pregnant flying.
There must be. I'm trying to remember. I don't remember Claire's episodes very well, so I'm sure that there's some reason that they get her on. But yeah, like there's no way in hell that they would allow an 8 month, not just get on a plane, but get on like a plane that's traveling from Australia to wherever the hell it's going. Both Maddie and I both sat up when they said she was 8 months pregnant. I was like, what? Oh,
is she watching it?
She did watch it. She thought it was ridiculous. She hates Shannon with an abiding passion.
Oh, Shannon. Yeah. I don't remember her being this annoying.
I do. But you know what? I miss it. I thought, it's funny. You asked in the beginning, like, how did I feel about the pilot? And it's one of the things that surprised me was like, I was like, oh, I miss Shannon. I miss someone who's just like, you know what? I don't like this. I don't like this situation. And I don't like any of you. And I don't like my not brother. And I don't like anything. And I was just like, yeah, it's pretty refreshing. I appreciate that.
You got a good point. I felt awkward when Boone was simultaneously being petty and arguing with her in front of Kate and Saeed.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, yeah, I guess there's a certain, like, a shade of humanity that you wouldn't otherwise get. Because I do have that both Kate and Saeed are both just kind of staring like, you don't have to come.
Yeah, it's like, please don't come. Please don't come on this very important hike. Bring your weird baggage with us.
The only note I wrote about Shannon, though, was I just wrote one thing, which was, I don't believe Shannon doesn't eat chocolate.
I'm trying to think of what else did I write anything else about Shannon? Shannon goes on the hike out of petulance. Charlie is the funniest character. Yeah, that's all I wrote. Yeah, she's like, I'm going. She's like, are you going on the hike? He's like, are you going on the hike? He's like, yeah. I was like, well, I'm definitely going on the hike.
I do like how they call it a hike when it is a mission. Like,
yeah,
that was the first glimpse I got of Twitchy Jack, which was, of course, when Kate like just kind of underplays it. Like, I'm going on a hike, and he's like, what?
No, you're not, she's like, going out there.
Yeah, it's like, that's not what this is. Anyway, sorry, I don't mean to go back to Jack. Okay. So we were on Claire. I don't have anything else really about Claire. I have a Jin Claire thing, but we can move into Sawyer if you want to move into Sawyer.
I don't think I have that much about Sawyer other than in that Empire article I read. He said that JJ, when he was shooting the polar bear, JJ Abrams threw a pillow at him, and that's what he was shooting at.
Oh, well, that actually bleeds into one of my Sawyer questions, which is, would a pistol take out a polar bear?
I don't think so. We could ask our friend Casey, who knows and weirdly a lot about bears. I would think no. I would think unless you hit it like right in the eyes, I would think a pistol would be not enough firepower to take out a polar bear. But this polar bear was out of its natural environment. We don't know how emaciated it was. I will say, I wrote in my notes, one of my favorite lines was, guess what? I just shot a bear. There are some really great lines in this pilot.
I think that's definitely something I appreciate with a lot of these lines. It's like, because I always, like, in my head when I think about Lost, I always remember Hurley as the guy who says what everyone's thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But like, yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, so many of these characters, like, none of them, with the exception of Locke, is like trusting or feels like they're in sci-fi or fantasy. So listening to Sawyer be very blunt about, yeah, I stole this, thought it'd be coming handy. I stole that, thought it looked cool.
Yeah, he stole the badge because he thought it was cool. When he tells, when they're like, why are you going to the hike? He says, I'm a complex guy, sweetheart.
I think in any other show, he would almost immediately like, oh, this guy's a racist, screw him.
Mm-hmm.
But then like they very quickly like endear you to him a bit.
I don't know if Sawyer is endearing at this. He's more of a creep, because like when Kate takes the gun from him and she gives it back and he like pulls her arm, he like almost kind of like smells her and he's like, I've been with girls like you. I'm like, that's not smooth at all, Sawyer. That's real grody.
I'm sorry. This is interesting because I had a very different take on that scene, because I freaking love, and again, I think some of this unfortunately is just because I know how this plays out.
Mm-hmm.
Like I wasn't thinking about that scene in a vacuum. As like Kate very clearly knows how to take a gun off him,
mm-hmm.
and is like clearly trying to con the con man, being like, oh, I've never used a gun before. And he is literally like, he's staring at her, smiling like, yeah, keep it up.
I think you're totally right.
Like, I adore, like, it didn't feel like the, like, yeah, it didn't feel like creepy, I'm going to smell you. It felt very much like I know what game you're playing. I've been playing this game too.
What's funny is I don't remember the Kate reveal as the prisoner happening until later, but obviously it had to happen during the pilot, because that's a huge twist. It's just so funny because like for some reason in my head it took longer for that reveal to come about, but immediately after she does the whole thing with the gun, we see that she's a prisoner and we know that she's lying about that. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think Sawyer, like, he's onto her immediately.
It does feel weirdly like pilot 1 and 2 do feel, because yeah, like pilot part 2 is almost like a Kate-centric episode in a way.
But it also like it shows like who these other people are. Yeah.
Yeah, they really do. It's so funny, like knowing now like how the format will dramatically change to the flashbacks. Just like they're gonna give you this like what do you call it? Like an appetizer sampler.
Yeah, that's really what it is. Another great line is Locke telling Walt, you're having a bad month.
I did enjoy that. I did not enjoy an old man asking a child if he can keep a secret, and then we smash cut away.
Yeah, that was super creepy. What? Here's my question that I have: is what secret do you think he told him? Do we find out what he tells him? Like later on, does he tell him like I can walk again, or does he just say this island is special? I vaguely remember like Walt telling his dad later on that like Mr. Locke told me that the island is special, or we're here for a reason, or something. But I'm trying to think about what secret he would have told him.
Oh, you know what? I think I remember exactly. I think he says, I don't even think he specifically said. I think Walt says to Michael at one point, he says a miracle happened to him.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds right.
That was the one thing that in terms of like, and I'm sure 2004 there was plenty of child abductions, but certainly being parents ourselves, yeah, not down with.
But you know what? I think that's definitely intentional, because we don't get a lot of Locke at all in the pilot, either in episode 1 or 2. We just get Kate very solemnly taking the boots off the dead man, and then you look at Locke and he's smiling with that orange, and it's creepy, and you're like, okay, is this the bad guy? So yeah, it's definitely meant to be like, yeah, we're definitely meant to be like, oh, this is a creep. This guy's being a creep. But
that's a really good point.
I didn't realize that the whole black and white, dark and light thing was introduced in the very first episode, the very first pilot. Him introducing backgammon, saying it's the oldest game in the world, that it's older than Jesus Christ. And he's saying there's two players, one is dark, one is light. And like, boom, you've got it. You've got Jacob and the Man in Black right there. You know, a lot of the dichotomies that'll get set up on the island later on, like who's good, who's bad. I don't know if they were thinking that deeply about it when they wrote the pilot, but that whole black and white thing really does come back in a big way at the end of the series.
I do like that they set that up quickly. I forget what I was seeing or reading at one point, but I remember at one point them mentioning like that was something they liked about Lost, is that it was like one of the first shows on TV that like asked existential questions without necessarily answers. So like as late as possible, it's like, hey, you know, we mentioned that these are forces between light and dark. Maybe we should have a manifestation of that. Well, we'll just call him the Man in Black.
Yeah, once again, as you've mentioned, the you know, the literary allusions being very high-handed and then followed by very, very blunt metaphors. It's like, no, yeah, the bad guy is the Man in Black. That's what he is. It's like, oh, okay. Does he get a name? No, we're never gonna give him a name.
Was the him eating the orange, looking at Kate, like, is that, so you think it is just it's just to show that he could be weird?
I think we as the audience are meant to think that this guy's super weird and all this stuff, and I think that it's more what he's playing is that like he's been healed on this island and he thinks this is a wonderful magical experience, and he's just really he's chilling. But yeah, I think we're meant to think that Locke is a bad guy or possibly a villain, especially because he's got that gnarly scar on his eye.
I've got a lot to say about your favorite character, Michael.
I was watching him and his first line in the show is Walt. It's the only thing he gets to say. I think he's a good actor. I think he's really doing the best he can. I think it's very clear that like he doesn't know his son and he's trying his best and he just is totally out of his depth.
I feel you there. I get the impression that he doesn't know his son well. They clearly don't know what his backstory is because, my God. Hey, when we get back home, I'll get you another dog. And what I do remember of Michael is that he fights tooth and nail to get custody of his kid.
Mm-hmm.
And in my head, I'm thinking like that character, that would be the equivalent of like, oh, I'll just go have another son. Like it is so like, oh, he doesn't know how to be a dad thing. It's like, you don't know how to be a person if that's your response to your kid losing his dog.
I don't know what the thinking was there, because like so many of the lines are so good and the characterization is so rich, and then you get a line like that where like clearly the intent here is to be like, oh, this guy's so out of touch, he doesn't understand that, it's not about the possession, it's like this dog like matters to the kid, it's an emotional connection, and he's just like, oh, I'll get you another dog, it's just like a toy or something. But it's like I think most people would know that's not what you say. It feels lazy. It doesn't feel good.
I really, really hated it. And again, I get that he probably doesn't know what his character's story is, but like, yeah, it just didn't feel, it wasn't even like, oh, he doesn't know how to be a dad. It was like, you don't know how to be a human. And then of course, add insult to injury. Actually, I think that line comes after this one, but like the fact that, and he very clearly delivers the line in a way where he's like, you can read Spanish. And it's like, Michael, it's a fucking comic. You can look at the pictures, dude.
Yeah.
Like, I just couldn't. Oh man, he's just so. They do not endear me to Michael at all.
No, it's tough to watch, and I can't remember if it gets better or if it gets worse over time. I mean, eventually it gets worse. Eventually it gets much worse, but yeah, I think it's. I don't have anything intelligent to say about it. I just don't like it.
I don't feel good about it.
I think also like as a father now watching the show, I have a feeling that I'm going to react a lot differently to his storyline than I did, when I was 19 or whenever I was watching this. Like when Michael, like when Walt's going in the jungle and he finds the handcuffs and Michael like freaks out He's just like, I told you to stay on the beach. And Walt's like, oh, I thought this was fine. I remember as a 19-year-old just being like, well, Michael needs to chill the fuck out. And I was a father who was sort of like, he told you to stay on the beach, Walt. He told you to stay on the beach. Don't you understand? It's been this horrible tragedy. You need to stay with it where he could see you.
Well, especially knowing that there's some sort of gigantic monster in the woods.
Yeah, especially when there's monsters. Oh, can we talk about the monster if we're done talking about Michael?
Yes.
I would like to write down all of the sounds, or I'd like to review all of the sounds that the smoke monster makes. I wrote down that it hoots, it stomps, there is a metallic grinding noise, there is a clanking snake skittering, which is the ticka-ticka-ticka noise. That's mostly it. I think what was confusing to me then, when I first watched the episode, and what's confusing to me now, is that it's not immediately clear what noises the smoke monster is making and what is the soundtrack, because it's the same, like especially that noise that sort of like announces the monster, where it's like that yeah, like it's very much like part of the soundtrack, which mostly I like. Michael Giacchino was the composer, and I love most of his work. A little bit, it's a little overbearing in places, especially in that first part of the pilot, but the work that he does on Lost is pretty great, with all of the sort of like the shh and the horns and the drums. We have no hint whatsoever that this is a smoke monster in the pilot. We just know that there's something big in the forest and that it likes to eat pilots. And I remember, like, later on when the smoke monster will start picking people off, that there was a theory, I think, I don't know if we talked about it, but I know me and my friends talked about it, that like the smoke monster like comes for you when you've like finished your business, when you've like come to at peace with yourself. And we were always trying to work out like, well, why does it kill the pilot? Like, what did the pilot do? And I think this is a case where I have to just let it go because I think it's just a pilot episode of a TV show, and something dramatic, like have the pilot get eaten by a big monster in the woods. And
no, I'm glad this is where it brought us to, because this is one of my things I wrote down that specifically follows up from the conversation we had for the intro into this. We're talking about how this may be purgatory, and is it okay to think of it as purgatory? And like, would it be interesting to watch a show about purgatory knowing that everyone's already dead? Have you seen the movie Jacob's Ladder?
Many, many times. It's one of my favorite films.
Okay, well then great. I'm going to read this quote in full for the for listeners out there. This to me, I'm like, oh man, this is how you do it. Where he does the, this is the famous quote. He said the only thing that burns in hell is the part of you that won't let go of life. Your memories, your attachments, they burn them all away. But they're not punishing you, he said. They're freeing your soul. So the way he sees it, if you're frightened of dying and you're holding on, you'll see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels, freeing you from the earth. It's just a matter of how you look at it. That's all.
Beautiful.
And obviously, I know that, but I'm a big fan of that movie. There's a small part of me that's like, hey, Jacob, there's a reference. But I also think like you could definitely like, I mean, honestly, even when they revealed the pilot dead, that was one of the sequences that broke the tension in one of those weird, I forgot what scene you were talking about earlier where they did this.
Oh, when Jack's looking in the fuselage and Boone comes up with the pen? Yeah.
Yeah. Similarly, and maybe you felt this way too, but this is one of those things where I thought this lingered, and it's weird because Kate finds the pilot wings on the ground, which, if we're going with the Jacob's ladder analogy, then it's like, oh, they're wings. He's soared off, but all these people are frightened, so they see this as a mangled corpse. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I
like that interpretation a lot, and I think having seen Jacob's Ladder, I think that's probably what I was basing that off of, that idea that the smoke monster comes for you when your business is finished, and the interpretation that they're seeing something terrible like a smoke monster, and somebody else might see something beautiful, as we allude to Locke seeing in later episodes, which we don't have to get to right now.
No, well, I know it's like it's getting ahead of ourselves, but yeah, I feel like maybe even that's the difference with like Mr. Echo and Locke but anyway, the way that scene is shot, it's a little weird where, Kate finds the pilot wings. You can see a body reflection in the puddle,
Mm.
And I assume at that point you're probably like, is that Jack? But then Jack appears. And I wanted to even say the score, it's like everyone's relieved. You know, Kate smiles. Charlie's like, oh, you're alive. And he's like, yeah. Whoa, guys, what did that? And then it does a slow pan up. But it's like weird because the tension of like seeing there's a body and above you guys. And it's like they recognize it as a body, but then Jack's there. And it's like, it's a weird way to break the tension.
Especially because like the shot of the pilot it's grisly. Like he is covered in blood. He has been shredded up. You don't really see like gouges or anything, which I assume is how they got away with it on like, you know, a primetime television show. But like he's just red from like head to toe. It's bad. And it's also like, I think, doesn't Charlie say like, what is that? And Jack just comes up and goes like, oh, it's a pilot.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this was a living human being a few minutes ago. Glad you guys are, adjusting to this well.
Yeah, no, I did I paused it a little bit on the pilot's face, and I was just like, oh, he is, because he's already, I mean, he looks bad when he's alive, but yeah, looks much worse when he's dead.
Also, Jack's explanation for how he got away from the monsters, he jumped in some bushes. Are we meant to think this is suspicious? Like, or is this just, again, just like, is this a line I'm not supposed to think about too much? Because I would be like, you jumped in some bushes? I don't think whatever did that is going to mind just dragging you out of a bush and eviscerating you.
Yeah, it's so funny, like, how much of that feels like, even Charlie, like, and I know that he's high at this point, but like, he's like, it was right behind me. It was there. I was dead. We were dead, but then I was fine. Like, I was like, what?
See, I like that. I liked it because it is the kind of dumb, panicked thing you'd say when your adrenaline is spiked, where like you're barely even getting like words out.
Yeah.
And especially as you mentioned that he's high. I used to think he was eating the heroin, which I have been told by somebody who would know that you can eat heroin. It is a thing you can do. You don't get high as quickly because you have to wait for the heroin to hit your bloodstream. And so the heroin has to be absorbed through your stomach and go through the lining into your bloodstream. But what Charlie's actually doing is he's rubbing the heroin on his gums, which is it's a much faster way to get high than eating it. So yeah, I also imagine that you probably can't show somebody shooting up in a TV show, or at least you couldn't back then.
I was gonna say.
But I always thought that was when I was younger and I didn't know anything about drugs. I always thought that was weird. It was like, well, I guess that's heroin, but I don't think you eat heroin. Also, I don't think it's supposed to look like silly putty. But
yeah. I thought it looked like the kinetic sand, which probably wasn't around in 2004. But
I bet it was. It was probably in like a sharper image. I remember like walking into a sharper image at the Spectrum.
Man, speaking of this, I have like a whole rant ready on the Spectrum when we find out that Locke comes from Tustin. But
I forgot about that. I forgot he's a local boy.
Yeah, the not as good. Anyway,
it's weird to think that you have like this has nothing to do with the podcast, but like there's a movie called Desert Spring? No, Palm Springs, the time travel one with Andy Samberg, where he goes to meet J.K. Simmons and they're supposed to be in Irvine, and they're like in a backyard, and you watch as soon as that scene pops up, you're like, they're not in Irvine. This is definitely not Irvine. Charlie. I miss Charlie. I know that he goes through periods of being really annoying on the show, but he's so much fun in the pilot. He is Hurley is lovely. He's a lot of fun too, but Charlie's the funniest character in the pilot.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to a little bit of like even like the Boone and Shannon, like the dynamic that they add to like the greater whole. Because there was a part of me that's like, why is Charlie here? And then like realizing that if it was just Jack and Kate, like there's no levity. And I even love how he plays the druggie, because even though obviously very stereotypical burnout druggie, I even love just he opens the bathroom and Kate's question is, what were you doing? And he's like, what? Just like you are so high that you like every question sounds super like you're paranoid of like.
I also like Jack and Kate only care about each other on this trip, and Charlie has to keep reminding him that he's there. He's like, Charlie's fine. Charlie's fine, by the way. I remember, it's so funny that like the things you remember and the things you don't. And like the fact that he goes with them to find the cockpit, I was like, why the hell would Charlie want to go? That doesn't make any sense. And I was like, oh, right, he's after the drugs. Right. Gotta get the drugs. That makes sense.
Which is also just such a great like justification for like diversifying that trek. Yeah, no, I love his high face. I think he does that really well. Like like just touching things softly or like leaning at the mirror and he's just having a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Like he does that very well, very convincing. Oh yeah, this goes back to one of my Jack things of like him like wanting privacy or getting away from people when he's just screaming at the top of his lungs, "You all, everybody!" He's like, "We got to keep moving."
I remember, I don't know if it was from an episode commentary or if it was a behind the scenes thing where they hadn't come up with the song. They hadn't actually written the song. So they basically just like gave him lyrics. And so he's just winging it for whatever it sounds like. I actually really like the way that scene plays out where like he doesn't go out of his way to tell people who he is, but like once Kate recognizes him, he's really flattered, and he's just sort of like, he's like, oh, but you do know who I am. He's like, oh, come to you. And then Jack could not give less of a shit. Doesn't even know who Drive Shaft is. Doesn't even. Kate's just like, oh yeah, you don't Drive Shaft. He's like, no, I don't. We're doing something else now. This is not.
Yeah.
Poor Charlie. No respect. The scene where they get the walkie-talkie working and they hear Rousseau's message and Shannon's translation, great ending to an episode. Like, it's genuinely creepy. Saeed like doing the calculation for how long it's been running. Shannon like, sobbing and trying to, translate the message. That was great. That was so
yeah.
It was good. It was really like, I was like, oh yeah, this is why I like this show. Like, and then Charlie just given that iconic line at the end, guys, where are we?
Yeah, and just how even just that shot, like it's spinning around the different characters. You've got Saeed also saying like the battery's going to run out, or no, I think even Boone is then saying like the battery's going to die, or Kate says, and then Sawyer's like she doesn't even speak French. She's saying she needs help or not.
You're right. Sawyer was fun.
It was just so chaotic. Yeah, I absolutely love it. And again, like it's interesting too because I didn't start writing this down, but it was actually at that last line since it ends on a question where I was like, how many unanswered questions do they propose in this episode? Because I also feel like they answered a ton of like, hey, why hasn't there been a plane? Oh, we're off course.
Yeah.
And like, where did these handcuffs come from? Oh, well, Kate was arrested. Like I felt like they actually answered. I can't think of any like other than obviously there's a giant creature out there, and where are you? But I don't feel like there was like too many. It's more like I want to know more about these characters. I didn't feel like there was anything of like. I guess maybe that's it. Is that the supernatural elements are very subdued?
Yes, I agree. I think that they leave us with a lot of cliffhangers, but they also do, answer some really important questions right off the bat. And I like that. I think that the show at this stage, it's tight. It's a tight pilot. It gives you everything you need to know and then leaves you wanting to know like a lot more. The momentum hasn't taken over the show yet. I think it does get to a place, call it maybe the end of third season, where the show has started to its reach exceeds its grasp. But it's good. It's really good. It is really good. I think it's the second part of the pilot for me that really drew me in more. Because as much as I love all the stuff with Jack in the beginning, I think seeing these characters interact and, come into conflict and discover the mysteries together, because their reactions to them are so good. Like how freaked out they all get by the polar bear, by the fact that not just that there is a bear, but that it's a polar bear and it should not be there, and how upset they all are. It's like, this doesn't coincide with anything that we know. It's not supposed to be here in the jungle. Why is this happening? What's this message? Why has this message been going for 16 years and 5 months or whatever? we are in a bad place and we don't know what's happening. This being an ensemble show is really to its strength, and there's so many characters and they're all so different. And yeah, I think this is a good show. I'd tune in. I'd tune in for the next episode.
That might be a good spot to just end on. But I have one observation. This is a question that I'm not sure ever gets answered. Jin, is he trying to check with other survivors if the food that he caught is poisonous?
No. So I can see where you're coming from with that, because he spends the whole first half of the pilot being like, don't come near us, don't stay away from us, we don't have anything to do with you. And then it doesn't make any sense that he would make food to serve to the rest of the group. It's weird. It feels like maybe we're missing something, that like he decided, I'm gonna serve food to people. I think it's meant to be an altruistic thing. I think he's supposed to be, trying to give people food and help them. I don't think he would give like a food he thought was poison to a pregnant woman.
So that's my question is because he says the whole like, we need to stay together. We'll just take care of our own, and like he hits Sun's hand when she's like trying to touch. But I was also like, but he wouldn't feed poison to of all the people. Like it makes sense go to Hurley first, but like. He
ranges them and like he gives like individual bowls and stuff. So yeah, I think he's meant to be a nice gesture. I don't know. It doesn't make sense that he would be so antagonistic and then be so nice. But yeah, I think it's supposed to be that. I think he's trying to make inroads. Like, we're going to be here for a while. We might as well, be good to these people so like maybe they can help us out.
Okay.
I really liked Jin, Sun, unbuttoning the button as soon as he gets up to leave. Like that glowering look she gives him as he gets up, just like, I'm button this motherfucker.
Well, that was my other one other observation was like, even though like the Kate in the beach is kind of gratuitous, I was also a little bit
I wrote that down. That shot totally unnecessary. Made me feel really uncomfortable. Like, it was just, she's just standing there.
Yeah.
I didn't care for that.
Yeah. Well, but like at the same time, like I see how I appreciate that you could make the argument that the plot significance is you have Sun who, she sees like, oh, that's a life of freedom or whatever.
I think you are absolutely right. Thematically, I see where they're coming from. But I think realistically, they wanted that shot to put in the trailer. I would put money on the fact that shot of Kate is in the trailer for like when people were like, the new show from ABC, Lost, and it's like there's like all this action, the plane exploding for no reason. I don't think we talked about that. Like when the wing falls, like what exploded? Like I know the turbine explodes, but then like other things. Anyway, it's like Jack running away. Just be like, guys, where are we? And then like cut between all that stuff. Just a shot of like Kate in her underwear and bra, just like turning to look at something. Like I can see it. I can totally see it. And I think that's what that is.
Yeah.
You know what it is? Right. I don't think you ever watched Star Trek Enterprise, but there is a scene in the pilot where the Vulcan lady and another guy have been on like an alien planet, and they need to test themselves or like decontaminate themselves or something. So they literally get into this like steam room, basically strip down to their underwear and just rub like gel on each other. It's a scene that there's no other scene like that anywhere else in the other 4 seasons of the show. It is very clearly just sort of like, this is a pilot of a new Star Trek episode, and it's sexy Star Trek. You snatch your granddad Star Trek. The ladies get naked in this one.
This reminds me, speaking of Star Trek, I do remember the preview for Star Trek Into Darkness, where there was just I don't even know who the actress is, but I do recall that there's just a screenshot of her basically nude, and then seeing the movie on a plane, and it's there for like half a frame.
Yep.
And it's like, what was the point of that?
You see this on pretty much, I think, almost like any pilot from this time, well, from a lot of time periods, but like especially like a lot of HBO shows, like there's always at least one, usually more, just gratuitous sex scene or nude scene like in the pilot, and then the rest of the show is like, that's funny. based on the pilot, I was under the impression there'd be a lot more sex in this show. I have been misled.
I have been watching and enjoying Bridgerton, and it was super funny because season 1 very much got the reputation of softcore porn. It kind of is. Season 2, none of it.
Just costume porn.
Yeah, basically. And they nixed mutton chops. That's the other thing that they did. But like, they're like, yeah, you know what? We did a season of that. No more mutton chops. But no, I did think it was so fascinating. Because I'm like, oh man, you guys kind of like you pulled him in with the softcore porn, and now you can just tell a captivating story. Not that the porn isn't good to the story of Bridgerton. I'm off track. But anyway, that was my last thing on a pilot. Yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it. Oh, actually, I do have one other thing that I think is funny, which is just the stray observation. Oceanic Airlines logo is such a 2004 logo.